Last night's meeting on Brexit and how long a delay to let Britain have dragged on and got quite fractious, pushing back the rest of the EU agenda into this morning.
Chers amis, nous n'avons pas seulement parlé du Royaume-Uni.
My dear friends, we didn't just talk about the United Kingdom, we talked about China as well. And it was much more easy to talk about China than it was to talk about the United Kingdom, I have to say.
There are definitely some countries, particularly those that aren't near to the UK, who are kind of sick of this and, you know, are sort of saying that they can no longer explain to the public why so much time is being spent on Brexit.
Tellingly, President Macron said the delay was shaped to reduce the chances of the EU copping the blame for a no-deal Brexit, which is looking much more likely to people here.
Que vouloir faire un sommet de crise la semaine prochaine.
Trying to organise a crisis summit next week was a bad idea because it would be the 27 who would have taken on the responsibility in case there is a no in British Parliament a few days before the deadline of 29th of March and say, oh, there's no deal. So the blame game would be against the 27th.
The EU gave Theresa May a few days to test her deal again, then 2 weeks to see what Parliament wants.
It means that until the 12th of April, anything is possible. A deal, a long extension, if the UK decided to rethink its strategy, or revoking Article 50, which is a prerogative of the UK government.
Some of those are options Theresa May said she couldn't countenance, even though at a press conference late last night she promised to seek the views of the Commons.
I was very clear that we need to work with the House to decide how to proceed if we don't get the deal through this week.
We don't know what Parliament will take as its view. We're seeking to crystallise a majority in favour of some propositions, so we have a way forward. Thank you.
Theresa May's deputy, David Livingstone, didn't waste any time calling in MPs and leaders of smaller parties to discuss how the Commons might conduct votes on other approaches.
Well, I think the whole assumption behind the exercise that David Livingstone's leading is that Parliament will be taking back control, and the question is how we do it in a sensible, orderly way. Thank you. Thank you.
Some pro-Brexit Tories were appalled and threatened to topple Theresa May the moment she goes near any of the options opposition party leaders want to discuss.
You think she might implement what they instruct her to if they have a clear instruction?
Well, part of the problem with that is that if it's either a weakened deal or indeed that it's no deal whatsoever, that it's an extension of Article 50, so we fight the European Union elections, the Prime Minister will be packing her bags. Her days are absolutely numbered in days.
The pro-Brexit march to leave reached Nottinghamshire today, not to everyone's delight.
But I shall be there in London with a million other people, some of whom have changed their minds in the face of the facts.
You think they've changed their mind?
Some of them have.
You think they've changed their mind?
Some estimates suggest 1 million pro-second referendum supporters might join her on the march in London tomorrow. An online petition to get a debate revoking Article 50 reached 3.5 million this evening, though the data suggests the hotspots of pro-Remain support are pretty much the same as they were in the referendum.
If it has more than 100,000 supporters, I believe this petition has to be debated in the British Parliament. So I assume it's going to play a role in the British Parliament, but that is a decision for the British side.
Some EU leaders are becoming experts in the minutiae of the Brexit saga, but patience is wearing thin. And the once unthinkable no-deal Brexit is looking to some leaders leaving Brussels today like a very real possibility.
Gary Gibbon with that report. Well, I'm joined now by Nadhim Zahawi, the Children's Minister. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Zahawi. So I've just come back from Brussels on the Eurostar, and the overwhelming impression I got in Brussels from just about everyone I spoke to is that Theresa May is finished. She has no credibility with fellow EU leaders. They do not believe that she can get the deal passed. And in fact, the more she talked about the deal, the less convincing she became. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I haven't heard a single EU leader actually say that Theresa May is finished. In fact, Donald Tusk and others have all said that what the Prime Minister presented and what they have now come back with is the options that are facing Parliament next week. And I think the Prime Minister has done one thing, which is sharpen the point of decision. because if we don't pass the withdrawal agreement next week, then clearly Parliament will have to decide as to whether we have a much softer Brexit or ultimately no Brexit at all, which I think, as someone who campaigned to deliver on Brexit and to want to keep my promise to the British people, I would much rather all of us come together and actually vote for the withdrawal agreement, and we can leave on the 22nd of May, as is now the new date, effectively.
OK, but the EU issued an ultimatum, I think, on Wednesday, because they wanted to pressurise MPs to vote for the deal. Then when they heard Theresa May give a speech attacking the very MPs she needed to get the deal passed, they frankly gave up the ghost. So they don't think this deal will pass. And my question to you is it actually going to end up on the floor of the House of Commons?
It will. The government has promised to bring the withdrawal agreement back now that the additional documents have all been ratified by the EU 27. With the new date of the 22nd of May, if the deal is passed. I think you're jumping to conclusion, Matt, with respect to you. I think it's well worth us waiting to see what happens in Parliament. Colleagues are looking at the detail now, and I think many colleagues who want to keep their promise to deliver Brexit will want to think about this long and hard, because all the other options, I think, will mean a much longer extension, which means we have to go back to our constituents and our constituencies and explain why we haven't left the EU and we have to run in European elections.
But the first thing the Cabinet heard about the contents of the letter that she wrote to Donald Tusk was actually on Twitter. Even the Cabinet was kept in the dark. So how can you give us assurances that the meaningful vote will be meaningfully put before Parliament a third time next week? Who's going to believe you?
Well, first of all, you're sort of offering these statements, which are all whispers and speculation. You haven't named a single. You haven't named a single cabinet minister who told you all this stuff. What I'm actually saying to you is the government has made it very clear that we will bring back the meaningful vote with the additional documents and, of course, the new date that if it's passed, we'll leave on the 22nd of May. If Parliament passes that, then we can move forward and deliver on the promise we made the British people to deliver on Brexit with a deal. If it doesn't, then I think all the other options mean a much longer delay, which means, I think, hugely problematic for all MPs, because we'd have to go back to our constituencies and explain why we haven't left the European Union.
Indeed. Does the Prime Minister support the indicative votes that are supposed to take place next week? And is she going to allow these votes without the whip?
Well, what the government has said is that we will bring back the meaningful vote. And if the meaningful vote obviously goes through, then we move on to delivering on Brexit. If it doesn't go through, then we will have indicative votes. And by definition, an indicative vote means Parliament has to decide where it wants to be. What deal? Would it be no deal, leaving with no deal at all? Would it be another referendum? Would it be an alternative, the Labour deal? We'll have to look at all these options. I think all those options are in my view, are much worse than the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement.
I want to ask you one more about her speech on Wednesday night, which has received widespread criticism across the board, and she almost sort of apologised for it last night. Do you think it was appropriate, the language that she used? Was it appropriate to attack members of Parliament, especially given that some of them have been threatened? And one of them, 3 years ago, was actually killed.
Look, I mean, I think what the Prime Minister was trying to do is share with the nation her frustration that Parliament cannot decide. We've had a go before at trying to vote for a referendum. That didn't go through. The Labour deal didn't go through. The Norway option didn't go through. What she was trying to explain to the nation is actually her withdrawal agreement will deliver Brexit as we promised the British people.
She was trying to pit the people against Parliament. She was trying to divide the people from Parliament.
Well, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. And today, as she has said again, she wants parliamentarians to come together and back the withdrawal agreement so we can leave in an orderly way on the 22nd of May and, of course, deliver on that promise we made the British people.
Nadeem Zahawi, thank you very much. Cathy.
Thanks, Matt. Well, now I can speak to the MP Anna Soubry of the Independent Group here in the studio. In her much maligned speech, didn't Theresa May at least have a point that people are fed up of MPs mucking around? And in that sense, at least, isn't it time you backed her deal?
Look, people are fed up. But it's not MPs who've been mucking about. I'm afraid it's the Prime Minister and her government who's been mucking about.
She's been mucking about as well as you.
No, we have not been mucking about. The one thing that will be recorded in history about this entire sorry process is the number of times that people like me have stood up at the beginning of the process and said, let us help determine the sort of Brexit that will do the right thing by British business and avoid the hard border in Northern Ireland.
The indicative votes idea.
Time and time again, we were told we are not interested. It's like the 48% were pushed to one side. And a consensus existed. I've had that conversation with the Prime Minister about 2 years ago, and I told her there is a consensus in Parliament for a single market, a customs union. You should do that. It will deliver Brexit, but do the right thing by British business. And she absolutely refused. Instead,
you've got a chance now, haven't you?
She put down her red lines.
But you've got a chance now to take back control, to coin a phrase.
This is another myth. This is a big myth.
Because you could actually put that on the table next week, a softer Brexit, and get the consensus if it does exist.
No, this is a huge myth, and I'm really worried about this. I went to see David Lidington with Chuka Umunna yesterday, and Tobias Ellwood has said this, so I can now say it, what I was told privately yesterday, because Tobias Ellwood, Defence Minister, has said it on the media today. What they are saying is the indicative votes are about this thing called the political declaration. That is this thing that will be our eventual trading relationship with the EU after we have left. But the withdrawal agreement is non-negotiable, and we can't have votes about the withdrawal agreement. So the lunacy of this situation is we have indicative votes that may say single market customs union, Norway plus, but that is to be negotiated in the future. But we have to leave on the terms of her withdrawal agreement, which has to go through Parliament in statute. It's a complete disaster, and the only way through it is to put it now back to the people, which is why hundreds of thousands of people are coming to London tomorrow.
There's not a consensus for that in the Commons either,
not yet.
The second referendum.
And you know, if Labour start to put into place its conference policy. You know, I'm really pleased that Tom Watson, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, apparently is coming on the march. Now I want him to come in the lobbies with people like me and let's vote for this to go back to the British people. And I want those Tory MPs who say in private that they know it's the only way through this mess and chaos. I want them to have the courage of so many of their fellow Conservatives who've resigned from government in order to speak up for a people's vote, to have the courage to be honest about it, to act with integrity and put the country, not their party, first.
But we know a straight vote on a second referendum wouldn't get a majority. But are you prepared to make... OK, but are you prepared to make a concession? Because we've been talking about MPs mucking about. Are you prepared to concede that you would put some form of Theresa May's deal back to the people? So you get what you want, but she gets a bit of what she wants too.
Sorry, I went to see the Chancellor with a group of members of Parliament from other political parties, and we sat there with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I think it must be 6-8 weeks ago, and we said we will vote for Theresa's deal on the basis it goes back to the British people. We said that 6 weeks ago, Kathy.
And you'd still do that now?
Of course, because it's the withdrawal agreement is something that at least could be delivered. I won't vote for it. The British people can then have a choice. If they vote for her deal, that's the end of it. And if they vote for us to remain in the European Union, which is the best deal we have with the EU, that's the end of it as well.
A lot of MPs have said that what Theresa May said, sort of pitting the public against MPs, was actually very dangerous. What's your view on that?
Well, it wasn't just dangerous, which of course it was. It was outrageous, actually. It was sort of right to the bottom of the pond of political life. It was a sort of a rather crude Donald Trumpism way of conducting oneself. It was appalling. It was also dishonest. I mean, to say that MPs have been banging on about Brexit, not talking about the shortage of funding in schools, changes to knife crime laws, how we integrate social care and NHS, that's what we're all demanding to do. It's this wretched government that is obsessed with Brexit and not delivering for the British people and putting the country first.
But are you feeling personally more threatened?
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm not
because you... I thought you wanted to be here.
Yeah, of course. I wouldn't be here on a Friday because I'd be at home on a Friday. I'd be in the Berliner in Beeston on a Friday night, not in London. I can't go home this weekend. My partner is away. And I had a really nasty death threat that was sent to our house by somebody who said, "We know where you live. We are on your doorstep. Look at the postcode."
And
I can't go home this weekend. That is the advice of the police. This senior police officer said to my other half yesterday, on Wednesday rather, he said, if she were my wife, I would be really seriously worried for her safety.
You're pretty resilient, but I mean, what toll does that take?
You know what? I mean, I am, but I haven't got a fear gene. But actually, when you receive, or your partner receives a card that says, in loving memory, in sympathy for the death of your partner, that treacherous bitch is now dead, and we're coming after you, and it's sent to your home address.
It has
seriously.
an impact.
I mean, it is absolutely awful. And what we've now got to do is bring our country back together again. And nobody is doing that, not least this government. And we've got to put all this nonsense to one side, put the country first, get on that march tomorrow and show them that we've had enough. The only way through it is that people's vote.
Anna Soubry, and just to say, obviously, apologise for the language that you repeated that you were sent, if anyone was offended by that.